So today we will be continuing on with our shirt. We have our sleeve prepared and ready to go on. So we're going to be stitching that sleeve armhole today, and then we're going to do the shirt hem. And then next week is our last demonstration for this shirt. We'll just do our buttons and buttonholes and any other, finishing touches, steaming, pressing, that sort of stuff that we need to do before turning it in. We'll do that next week. So let's go ahead and switch over and get started for today. Okay, over here, I have got my shirt stitched and ready to go. And then I've got my sleeve, again, ready, prepared to get put on. So the first thing we need to do is put that sleeve on is we're going to add in our easing stitch. So we need that basting stitch that runs along our sleeve cap that we're going to pull the tails on, and it's going to help us bring in that extra ease that happens on the sleeve cap. So let's head over to our machine and we're going to put in that basting stitch first. Okay, so over here, I'm going to push my stitch length up to a 4 for this basting. And then I need to make sure that I start with long tails on the top and bottom so that I can have something to pull on later. There we go. And then we're going to go from that front arm single notch. So this is my single notch indicating the front of my armhole. We're going to start there at 1/2 inch. And we don't need to back stitch for a basting. We're just going to follow along. We will pass up our single notch for our shoulder. So here's another notch right here that is for the top of my shoulder. And we'll go all the way to the back double notch. Okay, once we get there, I'm going to leave those long tails to pull on again. Okay, let's go back to our ironing board. Okay, so now I've got that ready. I'm going to start pinning those together. So I'm going to get my shirt and I'm going to turn that inside out, and I'm going to keep my sleeve right side out. I need to figure out which sleeve I have. So when these holes are facing the same direction, so I've got my hole open here and my hole open here. When they're facing the same direction, I should be looking at the same notch. So I've got a double notch here and a single notch here. So this is the incorrect side. Let's try this with the other side. Holes are facing in the same direction. Look at this notch right here. And I've got a single notch and a single notch. So now I know I'm on the correct side. And I'm going to put that sleeve, I'm going to stuff it down into the hole so that the openings are still facing the same direction. So again, this is the opening to my sleeve, and this is the opening to my garment. One is just sitting right inside the other. So now they are right sides together when you look at the fabric. So we're going to start pinning this together at our reference points. So the first reference point is that underarm seam. So underarm seam on our sleeve, the actual seam line, not the top stitching, should match up with the side seam on our garment. And again, we're matching up actual seam lines, not top stitching. Okay, I'm going to go over to my single notch and match those up. And that in-between space shouldn't have any ease, so I'm going to go ahead and put a pin in there as well. And then my double notch on the other side, match those up. And then our last reference point is that single notch that matches up with our shoulder. So single notch at the top of my sleeve is going to match up with the actual seam line on my shoulder, not the top stitching. Okay, and now I need to pin those in between areas. So here I've got shoulder down to my double notch. I'm going to grab one of those thread tails from the basting that we did. See if I can get it facing the right direction. Okay. So grab that thread tail and I'm just going to tug on it to allow the fabric to start bunching up. I don't want to create gathers or tucks. I just want to pull it in enough to where it's taking up that extra ease. Spread that throughout that whole section evenly. And then since the sleeve is on top and that's the one with the extra length, we're going to roll that over our finger and we're going to pin right around that basting stitch that we did. So here I'm taking up a very small amount of fabric because remember that edge is going to wave and we don't want to flatten down that wave. So right on the stitch line, it should be flat. The edge will wave. Okay. Okay, so that's the back side. Now I'm going to go over to the front and do the same thing. Pull on my little tail to start bunching it up, spread that ease throughout the entire section. And I'm only pulling it to where it bunches up to make it the same length as the garment. I don't want to make it shorter. Okay, and again, we're going to roll that over our finger and pin right on the stitch line. Okay, now we're going to take this over to our machine and we're going to stitch this at 1/2 inch. Okay, I'm going to stitch or push my stitch length back down to a 2.5. And I'm going to start at the armhole, or at the underarm, sorry, so that my back stitch is hidden in the person's armpit. And I want my sleeve to be on bottom because that's the one with more length. And we're trying to take up ease in that sleeve. So I've got garment on top, sleeve on bottom. Okay, we're going to start with our back stitch. And we're going to work our way around that armhole, and you can bend it up in front of the foot to take up that extra ease. Make sure that your raw edges over here on the right stay even with each other. And then you can use your middle finger to feel right in front of that foot to make sure that there aren't any tucks forming. Okay, and this is my, you can see it right there. See if I can cover this up. So this is my shoulder seam right here. So as I go over that, make sure that it stays folded and pressed in the correct direction. It should, because you have that top stitching on there, but always just double check as you go. Oh, I think that flipped around. Where did it go? There it is. Okay, and then when you get back down to the underarm area, you're going to connect back to your original back stitch. Okay, let's take this over to our ironing board again. Okay, at this point, I want to check from the outside of that seam and make sure that I did not end up with any tucks on the seam line. If you did, then you're going to need to go back and seam rip that and redo it. So don't take out your easing stitch yet, because if you end up having to seam rip, then you'll still have that easing in there to help you when you redo it. But make sure that you didn't end up with any tucks. And then if you're satisfied and you don't have any tucks, then we can turn it right side out. We're going to remove that basting stitch, and then we can just steam it. So we want to make sure that both seam allowances point into the sleeve. I'm going to put my little ham in there to kind of fill out that sleeve area. Both seam allowances stick into the sleeve, and then we're going to use our iron to just heat it up and steam it. So hopefully your iron will have a steam function on it. And then you can just push that. You don't want to actually touch your iron to the fabric because we don't want to press a hard crease into this, but we do want to steam our seam allowances in that direction. Okay, you're going to do that for both sleeves, and then we're ready to move on to the hem. So coming down here to the hem, this is a curved hem. So we need to make sure that our hem allowance is very narrow, because with a curve, wide allowances don't work very well. And that's because when you go to fold them up, you'll see you get this extra fabric when it's a thick seam allowance. So we want to make sure to have a very narrow. We're going to do a 1/4 inch seam allowance. We'll double fold it, press it, and top stitch it. So in order to fold it, the first thing we need is that basting stitch to act as our fold guide. So we're going to take this back to our sewing machine, and we'll do a basting stitch at a 1/4 inch all along this edge. Okay, so again, pushing my stitch length up to a 4, and then I'm going to start just at one of my side seams. And you'll see it has this curve right at that side seam. So make sure that you're following that edge. I'm going to stitch this at a 1/4 inch. Let's head over to our ironing board and we'll fold and press this. Okay, so over here, we're going to fold up that 1/4 inch towards the wrong side of our fabric. And so I'm just folding right on that stitch line. We're going to press it all around the garment. When we're doing that basting stitch, we want to make sure that that 1/4 inch is really consistent, because now we're using it as our guide for the entire hem. And if we don't have a consistent width on our stitch, then when we fold it up and press it, our hem will not be a consistent width either. Okay. Whenever you get to those curved areas, this is not a 45-degree angle, so it's not a true bias, but it is on a slant. And so that area of your fabric will have a little bit of extra stretch, and that will help you get around those curves so that the fabric can form to those curves. Okay, so that's one time around. So now we're going to go a second time around, folding it again right at that raw edge. So we're doing another 1/4 that we're taking up. Okay, and this time around, I'm going to go ahead and pin so that stays where we're going to stitch it. Okay, so we're going to go top stitch this from the outside of the garment. And as long as we do it right at that 1/4 inch, then we should catch the inside just at the folded edge on the closer to the body of the garment. Okay, let's go top stitch this. Okay, I'm going to start at one of my side seams. I need to push my stitch length back down to a 2.5 from whenever we were basting. So I'm going to start right at one of my side seams from the outside of the garment. Again, at that 1/4 inch. And we're just going to top stitch the full way around. And I always like to use my finger right here in front to feel where that hem is. I can kind of feel the thickness to make sure that I'm going to be catching it as I go. And then I'm going to connect back to my stitching from the beginning. And then always double check on the back side before you move on that that full hem got caught. Okay, so double check and make sure there aren't any areas of your hem that are able to unfold. Okay, let's go ahead and go back to our iron. Okay, so that is the end of our hem, as long as we've got everything caught. So at this point, we just need to clean things up. So any thread tails that you have hanging off, if you have any frayed edges, so you may be able to see right here, my raw edge of my fabric started fraying before I did the hem. So they're kind of sticking out. So make sure all of that sort of stuff you clean up and trim off those frayed edges if they're sticking out of your hem. And then give it one last good press. So you'll see after I've stitched it, it's kind of waving up a little bit. If yours is doing a lot of waving, then you may have stretched it out. Hopefully we should have prevented that with that initial basting stitch that we put in there. That helps hold the shape as you press it. But if for some reason yours is waving a lot, you may have stretched out your hem. But we're just gonna, that little bit of waving that it does should press right out. So I'm gonna get a press and it should lay completely flat after that. There we go. So now it's laying nice and flat. So that's where we're stopping for today.